Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mic, setting up week 6 in the OUA. We'll take you around the league. We'll talk a little bit about the stat keeping conundrum happening across USports and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing well, my man. When you first look at this, you're going, how are we already in week 6 of this OUA season? This is crazy. But realistically, when you look at the entirety of U Sports, we're barely halfway through the entirety of this season. So there's still plenty of football left to go, and that makes me smile.
There's plenty of football, and there are very good matchups coming up. Not necessarily this week, but we're going to do our darndest to sell the heck out of these games, both in the OUA and across U Sports. Typically, at this point, we would talk about the U Sports top 10, but if you didn't already check out our mid-season check-in podcast, I think that's what we called it, please go do so. You'll hear us talk about our separate top 10 lists for both all sports, all teams across esports football, and as well our top 10 quarterbacks lists. We also give a sneak preview of who probably or who our conference MVP picks are at this midway point. So check that one out. But as I said, because it's one thing when Tom, when you and I have these conversations out of frustration and not everything makes it onto the podcast, but once other people start reaching out to us expressing the same frustrations of things. And we very much had our venting podcast earlier this week. So hopefully we've gotten most of the venom out already. But when people reach out about certain things, it does, make us realize that it's probably worth talking about. And in this case, it's the just atrocious stat keeping that has not only been occurring in the OUA, because frankly, I forget when it first popped on our radar, looking at some OUA stats of just how poorly, especially on the defensive side of things with the rushing yards per game, things have been kept. But I was almost, partly I was like, okay, I mean, OUA has a lot of problems right now. There's some much more competent conferences out there. Shout out Can West, shout out RSAQ. Little thumbs up for the AUS. The whole U Sports stat keeping can't be this bad. It is. It is. And I don't know how that is. Tom, I know you were the one receiving some of these messages, whether they're people who ought to be mentioned by name, but just, we're getting some feedback about it and it's causing us frustration already. We're clearly not the only ones.
No, and I think there's a lot of people who have noticed this, a few people that have reached out to us specifically. But I think one of the most egregious examples of this is the rush defense category. I know that Carleton has struggled against the rush. I don't think they're averaging 721 rush yards per game, though. Somehow, some way, I look at that and exactly like you said. Okay, maybe it's an individual thing because these stats are uploaded game by the people who are the home team, whoever's recording those stats, and away you go. But all of the stats have issues on the OUA. So I have to imagine not every person doing the stats who's sending these in does that incorrectly. And then everything at U Sports is also the same way. And maybe that's just because U Sports just naturally pulls from the other sites and leads into that. So if there's a problem at the site level, there's a problem at U Sports level, fine. But how are we 6 weeks into this and nobody has noticed? Nobody has I don't think that makes a whole ton of sense here. I think that in our penalty category, somehow, some way, the Ottawa GGs have 23 penalties and minus 10 penalty yards. Don't think that's true. And I said to the person who reached out to us, thank God that you and I actually watched these games in order to look at what's happening here. Because if we didn't, we just tried to tell the story through the yardage, we'd be like, what is happening with these rush defenses? Does everybody just leave the field? This is insane.
And the thing that's frustrating too is that there are stats that give more context to what you see with your eyes, but as a prime example, the red zone stat is kind of good because on the one hand, we've been talking about how we literally were just having this conversation before we started recording. As a Guelph fan, as a Guelph alumni, it's been frustrating how potent the offense has been by numbers alone. yet it's not translating to scoring. And as we've kind of been saying all year, it's kind of the inverse of the bend but don't break defense, where it's a drive but don't finish offense. And so again, because I'm not keeping track of every single Guelph drive to see when they're getting in the red zone, when they're executing, those are stats that are good to rely upon on the people whose job apparently it's supposed to be to do so. Yet, according to the red zone stats on the OUA, Western, Queens, and Ottawa all have yet to even make a red zone attempt. Mac is also listed without one, but I'm actually that might be true. I don't know yet.
Ah,
I'm teasing you, Tom. I'm teasing you. So it's just it's it's frustrating. It's very yeah. It's we do a lot of work here just trying to keep this abreast, and it's frustrating that it feels like the people that actually do it aren't even pulling their own bloody weight.
yeah, like we were talking about this beforehand, obviously with the big announcement to the CFL, and because it's the midseason, whatever, we have at the release of this podcast recorded four separate podcasts for this week, showcasing like the commitment that we have to our great game and what we're willing to do for this and everything else. And to see people who are supposed to be doing the same thing not hold up their end of the deal, and to see people wonder like, oh, why is our game not being more celebrated? Why aren't more eyes on it and things? And you're like, friends, a little bit of help here as people who are doing this for free for you guys would be so helpful.
Yeah. Well, people don't tune in just to hear us commiserate. They hear our breakdowns of the game. So let's hop into the week 6 action. We have a decent little spread of the game times on this one, but we're going to start in Kitchener Waterloo, where the Laurier Golden Hawks are playing host to the U of T Blues. For U of T, of course, coming off that tough loss at home to Windsor, and for Laurier, coming off that nail-biter victory in Ottawa. Two teams in vastly different positions. This would have been a much more interesting matchup perhaps earlier in the year, when whether it was a function of teams not having such a clear read on how U of T is trying to move the ball, or perhaps how they have to move the ball, perhaps if it's out of necessity. Laurier is very much in a refining stage right now with their game and trying to make sure they're in tip-top shape. Obviously, they got a bit of a scare out there in Ottawa, but Ottawa is a top 10 team. They're one of the best we have in Ontario, certainly one of the best in all of USports. I want to throw this towards you, though, Tom. And thinking about this matchup, we talked about how one of the things that Ottawa seemingly did so effectively against Laurier's defense, a defense that in the secondary is star-studded, but as we've talked about, going back to our conversation with Arnaud Desjardins and him breaking down the Vanier Cup and the matchup against Laurier, is that you can get some stuff underneath against them. They rally to the ball. They're great tacklers. They're physical defensive backs, kind of similar, very similar to Queens, I would say, in that regard. And we saw how Ottawa was just kind of running these deep hooks, these kind of in routes with the receivers settling into some of these zones. And Josh Jansen, the timing he has with guys, especially Noah Avery, putting that ball right out of the break and letting Big 25 pick up some yak yards. And they were pretty efficient with that. I say all that in that we know that U of T, with this, very potent passing attack at times, definitely been slowed down a bit in the last couple of weeks, and makes sense. They've been going up against stronger defenses. Oftentimes finds their success by utilizing those crossing routes, similar to how your McMaster Marauders often like to move the ball. I'm curious, Tom, throwing this to you. How do you feel that recipe will work against Laurier's defense? Because part of me wonders, and this is me trying to make some conversation out of a game that frankly I don't think will be terribly interesting just based on the matchup itself. But there is part of me that's curious to see, because, Laurier being a possible Vanier Cup contender this year, as a Vanier Cup contender, it's fascinating, not about the wins and losses at this point, but of where perhaps those weaknesses possibly are. And I do think we saw Ottawa not expose, because I don't think it's that drastic, but show an opportunity for you to be able to move the ball on them. And I'm curious to see whether this U of T attack will perhaps give more clarity on where those soft spots are for, the Lavals, Saskatchewans, Montreals, Westerns of the world watching these games in prep for possible semifinal and national championship games.
I think that the standard practice that U of T had, certainly at the beginning of the season, with that crossing routes and that sort of middle of the field setup, kind of plays perfectly into Laurier's hand defensively because they like to keep everything in front of them and come downhill like bats out of hell. And that's where we've seen Jahari Hastings really do his thing. That's where we've seen Owen Getz and the rest of that defensive secondary keep everything in front of you and then punish whoever decides that they want to try to touch the ball. To me, I think having a big receiver like a Noah Avery really did Ottawa a lot of great things. And once again, Josh Jansen had his best game of the season, throwing for over 400 yards in that regard because he's being smart with the football and spreading the ball out. With U of T, I'm very nervous for this offense because it seems like over the past 2 weeks they've kind of been figured out as it were. You know, Windsor holding them, Queens doing the exact same thing, and playing against a team that's right up there with those two, and certainly one of the better ones in terms of the defensive play that we have. I think your best bet here is going to be to try to find a one-on-one scenario and try to throw a deep ball at bare minimum to make those defensive backs respect the deep ball threat, and then that'll allow some more crossers underneath. But no matter which way you frame it, this is going to be a tough battle for the U of T Blues.
We've seen some signs of life going back to the York and Waterloo game of a bit of a rushing tack for U of T. I really don't see how that's going to be the case, and I don't think Laurier is going to sell out to stop the run. It's just very much that similar matchup with Queens, who, as we saw when the two teams played each other, are pretty close in stature, being Queens and Laurier. Laurier obviously a cut above, where Queens could just sort of sit in their base defense and know that any attempt to run the ball is pretty well going to be stymied right away. And they have dogs in the back end accumulating those, what was it, like 6 interceptions that they got on Barnett. Which kind of brings me to the next piece. And then we can talk about the Laurier side of things to kind of look at maybe where they can start. We can talk about them as refining their game and the things that we want to see from them. I brought this up, and this is no way of trying to stir the pot out of just, being a shit disturber, nor anything against the young man personally. But is this the game where if things go sideways, do they make a change at quarterback? Do they take that opportunity to say, and I get it, like Barnett on the year, his numbers are still tops amongst the league, but it's not by a large margin. He got a huge head start and just slowly, whether it's Cal Wither, Tristan Aboud even, my guy Josh Jansen, just been with more consistent outputs, quickly catching up. And frankly, I think after this week, he'll probably be 4th, maybe 5th in terms of those yardage numbers, with just where I think Laurier is going to stymie him. So without trying to be, going at the young man by any means, you still don't get those numbers without being talented. Like, I don't want to take that away from him. At a certain point, like, what's our plan here? Because, at a certain point, like, you need more to it. Or maybe it's just the fact that, look, no, we know the passing stuff is good. We really need to revamp the O-line and get the run game going and work on these other things. Like, it's not his fault right now. We just know that there are too many other holes right now in our team, and guys and other teams can really just hone in on him. Or do you say, let's take another look at it? And we are perennially the don't mess around with your quarterbacks guys, but the season's pretty well already lost. So just out of curiosity, what's crossed your mind in that regard?
So a week ago, I would have said absolutely not. And I think I did say absolutely not in a similar question here. Scott Barnett's your guy. He's done a lot of really great things. And I think you continue to ride that arm and trust in the fact that he's going to get better and better. Well, they did that last week against Queens. And they watched
Windsor.
this young last week against Queens. U of T. Was it Windsor?
Yeah.
It was Windsor. My
Windsor,
apologies.
Queens the week before.
My apologies. So we watched that 2 weeks ago against Queens, and we watched this young man throw 5 interceptions and no touchdowns. And they kept him in there. They kept him doing his thing. And I think that there is some merit in doing something along those lines and not subbing a guy out, because you're saying, you know what, you are our guy. this is going to be a rough game. Let's ride this out. Let's get into the film afterwards. Let's clean this up and let's move forward. You have another game against Windsor last week and 77 yards and two interceptions. Okay, we've made the commitment. You have been our guy for through 2 weeks of some rough play. Not even, I don't want to say rough play on his behalf, but just defenses that have figured out this offense or figured out who he is, whatever, and have limited what he's able to do here. If you go into the same scenario at halftime and it's not like the same kind of story, yeah, I think you do just decide to put Caleb O'Donoghue in there to say, we got to try something. The definition of insanity, doing the exact same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. That's where we're approaching that territory right now. So if you want to change something up, I think that Jake Oseen and Chris Joseph are phenomenal receivers. They're 2 and 3 on the USports receiving yards list. And like you said, albeit everybody else is starting to catch up because the passing attack haven't been there, but I think those two guys are really good. So I don't necessarily want to switch them out. I think you go at quarterback.
Part of me is also thinking, kind of going against what I said, but this is less of the actual X's and O's part of it, is that the following week they get to host Mac, and I believe this is Barnett's 4th-year eligibility that he's using here. And so on the possibility that, and then they go on their bye and then they finish out the season at Ottawa. And Mac's a good defense as well. Now, Mac's not Ottawa, and they're not Laurier defensively, let alone just generally speaking. There's part of me that's saying, and obviously you can still do exactly as you said, it's rough at halftime, let's get O'Donoghue in. There is the part of me that's saying, okay, but and I don't know if this is his last year. Again, I believe he's played in all 4 of his years as a varsity Blue. There's a chance this is his last one. In his last home game, typically that is your senior night to begin with, so you're already, lauding him and his classmen against the weakest of the 3 defenses you have on the remaining part of your schedule. My hope is that regardless of what direction they go with, and I recognize this is going against what I just said momentarily, it sort of dawned on me, I do hope that regardless of what decision they want to make in this game, that they take that opportunity to let him, ride off into the sunset. But at the same time, I'm hearing myself saying that. I'm saying, great kid, great stuff that he's done here. But if it's moving forward that you need to do, then you got to move forward. I can understand that with a very small handful of guys that you would ever say, let's possibly, take away from where we need to be going in the future to be able to just give this one individual a moment to shine. I don't know. It's tough. But let's talk about the Laurier side of things. Tom, we obviously saw that, on the one hand, the 30-point output against Ottawa was, a surprise both in the nature of the total numbers being lower than, you expect from that team and the double goose eggs in the second quarter. The numbers are off the chain, though, in terms of the yardage. And especially as the Guelph guy in the room, it's been a major point of frustration for myself constantly seeing the yardage that Guelph puts up, and I just don't care because it hasn't produced. Laurier has obviously produced, and they put up yardage. And Ottawa's a great defense. What are you making of Laurier offensively coming off that Ottawa game where, again, it's a really strong defense. They moved the ball. They got shut out in the second half. And I'm not saying that's a trend of any kind. And if there were any things that need to be cleaned up, a U of T defense where we like some of those core pieces in there, but certainly not one where we're worried about Cal Wither and co getting it going. What are you kind of seeing coming off that Ottawa game with a slightly weaker opponent and being back at home here?
Well, it is the second time this year that they have had a less than stellar second half in a game. And let's not forget the very first game that we went to. They looked unbelievable against your Guelph Griffins when we were in the house for that home opener. And then Guelph outscored them in the second half 28-10. And so subsequent games, I went to their week 2 game against Windsor, and even the vibe, I was up in the press box next to Coach Todd Galloway, which was so awesome to hear him call the plays and just be a part of that again. But At halftime, they're leading against Windsor, and he gets up and he comes out and he goes, "Well, we were in the same spot last week. Got to make sure that we have a better second half." And so that's the mentality going into this. And then they played against Queens, and I think they scored 26 points in that second half. And so it looked like things were back on track. And then to get to this Ottawa side and to go scoreless in the second half. Now, am I ringing alarm bells here? No, by any means. But I think it is starting to look like something of a trend here. And I don't know if there were similarities between what happened in that Guelph game and the Ottawa game in the second half. Once again, we're not in those film rooms. We're not in the coaching rooms. We don't know 100%. But to me, I'm looking at this offense being like, hey, never again do we score under 14 points in the second half. I think with the quality and how good this offense is, and the fact that any play anyone touches the ball has an opportunity to score, I think that's a fair goal to have. And that's certainly the goal that I would want to have for this Laurier squad going into this, because like you mentioned, once again, you don't want to look further ahead here, but you go U of T here, you've got a bye next week, and then hang on.
Carleton. Yeah, bye then Carleton.
Yeah, a bye, then Carleton, and then Western.
Western. Yeah.
So you don't have that many games to make sure that you are tuned up and ready to go for your toughest matchup of the season so far. So I'm going into this being like, yeah, let's make sure we're on our P's and Q's and that we're executing at the highest of levels.
And it's kind of the inverse of some of the things that, if we're going to be critical towards Western, and whenever we talk about these top teams, we're nitpicking, where Western's had some slow starts and then picked up late. Mm-hmm. And we've certainly seen with both these clubs, going back to, the Yates Cup last year, where Laurier got ahead so quick, Western made a push, but it wasn't good enough, and Laurier's able to hold out and come up victorious. But then the year before, where Western shuts out Laurier in the third quarter, put up their points, or it might have been the flip. Western might have gone up, Laurier made a comeback, and then Western put sort of the pedal to the metal towards the end there. Both these teams obviously know you got to play 4 quarters of football. There's been moments where we haven't quite seen it from these clubs. What that's chalked up to, hard to really say. But nonetheless, I don't expect anything but a dominant day offensively from them. Defensively, as we already detailed it, I mean, I did my best to make the take that maybe, like how Ottawa was able to move the ball, U of T might have similar abilities in that realm. The Harnour injury is only becoming, in some ways, I want to say this carefully, less significant in the standpoint that then, the Owen Getzes of the world are now just getting much more reps in there. Still not the player who Harnour is, but at least if it's going to happen earlier in the season and not derail it so you can kind of get back on your stuff here. I don't know. It's Laurier, and probably by a lot at home. I don't know what else I want to really squeeze out of this one. Do we get a Sam Hankey passing touchdown on it? I don't know. The old hanky panky, we'll see. Tom, anything else you want to try to squeeze out of this one?
Yeah, well, it's Laurier in this one pretty clearly here. I know that teams are now going into this, and probably teams saw it in week 2, but teams are definitely going into this game against U of T and going like, well, your team is your offense, and specifically your passing offense. And as long as we limit that, you're gonna have a lot of struggles here. I want to see this U of T squad go into a team against Laurier and anybody in the rest of this league or rest of this season and say, yeah, that our passing offense is definitely the most significant part of our entire team here, and we're still going to produce. Because that's what I haven't seen. It's Windsor and Queens going into this being like, yeah, your passing offense is the most significant here, and we're going to shut it down. The great teams don't allow to get shut down. They get limited at times, sure, but they don't get shut down. And if U of T wants to be classified as that, the old Bird game, the Clay Sakara glory days, and all that stuff, you got to perform even when you're on the top defenses, and even when they know, well, the ball's got to go into Scott Burnett's hands and he's got to make a play somehow. I still need to see something.
I mean, even going back to that Waterloo game, they only put up 23 points in that one. And as time has demonstrated to us, we like that Waterloo team. But I do think this has been very much a team that, and this is kind of going back to our commentary when, some of those UFT players wanted to sort of, or former players, I can't remember exactly who it was, wanted to get at us for, taking Carlton at home in that game, but it's whatever. We don't need to gloat on that one. It's gonna be a tough one for them. It's Laurier at home. Let's make a move to a game that's not all that much prettier, I should say. It's Western coming off their bye, going into their homecoming, and hosting your McMaster Marauders, coming off the highly emotional, exciting win in the second annual at the 55 Bowl. Tom, good on Mac for picking up that win. Guelph looked very poor offensively. But as we were looking through numbers, both in our attempts to just truly dive into how poor the stat keeping has been, but also in our attempts to try to divine something of interest in these matchups this week, because they're really not that pretty. Mac's offense, same way that we were saying, you start with what you see with your eyes, but then the stats can add a bit more context. We've both been demonstrating the opinion that Mac's offense, to anyone's eyes, has not been where you want to. Love Thalman, love LT. Mm-hmm. The numbers very much show that that's been the case there. Western's defense getting better and better, and Ethan Dolby is putting up numbers that, frankly, I think the bulk of our conversation here will be maybe contextualizing the season Ethan Dolby's been having a little bit. But Mac's offense has really struggled this year so far. Is there any part of you, in thinking about this Western defense, in the strides it's taken, because it's gotten a lot better since the start of the year, but still being a unit that a lot of new pieces in there, or pieces in different spots, was a unit that teams were moving the ball on, whether they were always scoring? Is there part of you looking at some aspect of that matchup, Mac offensively and Guelph and Western defensively, where you're holding out some hope, or does it just feel like Western's just going to shut the door on them?
I still think, I'm hoping that Mac's offense can continue on the trends that we have seen here. I think that I mentioned it during the review pod. I think that good things happen when Jackson Taylor touches the ball. When he's made a focal point within the passing game, good things tend to happen. And even if that means that he gets limited or he gets double covered, that opens up an Aiden Nemeth to go down the sideline. That could open up an Everett Reed or some of these other guys in order to really do their thing. And we saw a lot of good things out of their double tight set, or a single tight set against Guelph. And I imagine that's going to be a big part of the game plan going into this, if for no other reason than to just allow a max protection to try to keep Thalman free and to make those throws and reads. Whoever that Richard Adubafor is on is going to be locked down. And if he's trailing Jackson Taylor, I don't expect him to have a very big game. Then that means that other guys are going to have to step up into this one. But while certainly I like what I saw from that McMaster offense previously, like, this is a Western defense that is phenomenal at what they do. Max von Muhldorfer is playing some of his best football so far in this year at that one tech spot, getting a few sacks as a one tech, which is unbelievable. And it seems like they found their rhythm at linebacker with Jude Buchanan at that middle, and sometimes switching out for Ferrancino. And this is, I don't have a ton of confidence going into this, A, because it's Western off a bye and their homecoming, but B, I have not seen enough from this McMaster offense, at least in terms of consistency, to really pick out like, oh, this is where they could really do their thing.
Well, then let's not waste our time talking about, such exercises, and talk about Ethan Dolby for a bit here. We were saying on our midseason check-in podcast that we're still taking Ethan Jordan as of right now as our MVP coming out of the OUA. But it's a really good take. It's a really great case you could make for Ethan Dolby, who at this moment in 4 games played has 659 yards and 11 touchdowns without a single fumble. And the yards per game is outrageous as well, as one would imagine. And we were trying to recontextualize this and thinking about, well, in the last you know, 15 years or so since about our time in the OUA, both playing and doing media, there have been two running back MVPs. One from Western 3 years back in Keon Edwards. And just to go over those numbers real quick, who rushed the ball 130 times for 1,032 yards and 9 touchdowns. And beyond that, he also had Edward Winati on his team with 924 yards and 7 touchdowns in addition to that. I start this piece of the conversation to say justice for my guy, JP Simonkinda, who we were, driving that bus that he was the MVP that year to begin with. And then our guy in James Peter was the proper defense or the President's Trophy Award winner. Put that aside for right now. But when I think about what Ethan Dolby has so far halfway through his season, I have to imagine that in terms of the Keon Edwards comp, in terms of a running back MVP, that you'd certainly say that whether or not Dolby tracks point for point, like doubles his output towards the end of the season, being at the 4 game mark of his year, because that would be absolutely bananas. It would be like a 1,400 yard season with 22 touchdowns. I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. But I think there's a way that we can say that it tracks, there's a bit of a fall off, just natural progression to the mean or regression to the mean, whatever. And it's still a year that's better than what Keon did. The other comp, though, of course, is Dylan Campbell in 2014, who rushed for just under 1,500 yards, 13 touchdowns, 2 fumbles, but carries the ball 185 yards on, as you reminded me, a bloody broken foot. I feel like Dolby will somehow fall a bit in the middle of there. The touchdowns will probably be triumphant amongst all of them. Running back MVPs, as we talked about as well in having the conversation about what a receiver has to do to truly win an MVP, because so often you then just give the credit to the quarterback. What does it take for you to be able to say, all right, a running back, is truly the most valuable player in the OUA? I mean, the OUA, as we always talk about, is a rush heavy conference. So it makes sense that we would maybe have that more often, but bears out, it's not that much more different from how it plays out in the other conferences. What is sort of for you to see an MVP at the running back position that they might have to do for their team?
Well, I think there just needs to be a clear separation in even just the rushing category with some of these guys. I mean, when you look at specifically at the Dylan Campbell one, like you mentioned, he rushes for just under 1,500 yards. The next closest guy to him is Reed out of Mount Allison, who rushes for just under 1,000. So in 8 games, he's got more than 500 yards of difference there. And in touchdowns for Reed and Mount Allison, just keeping this, comparison going, Reed finishes with 5 touchdowns compared to Campbell's 13. Like the difference in the jump between number 1 and number 2, even if that's just in yardage, is outstanding. And I think that's really where that comes into play. And when you look at this side of things, Marshall Erickson is pretty close to Ethan Dolby, at least in the grand scheme of things. Now, just purely in the OUA side of things, yeah, you've got Kasari, who's right on his heels as well. Dolby's got 659 yards rushing, and Kasari's got 617. It is worth noting, Kasari has played 1 extra game than Ethan has. So that also factors into things here. But I think that if Ethan Dolby can continue on the trajectory that he is going here, and I don't think he's going to have every game be 300 yards rushing by any means, although I've been proven wrong before.
Not often.
If he finishes with just around or above 1,000 yards rushing, but he's got like 20 touchdowns on the ground, I think that's good enough to win you an OUA MVP.
20 touchdowns. That's incredible to think about. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where it ends up, because it's a year that is tracking to be record breaking. We'll maybe pull those numbers up for next time we're on. Much like we talked about with Laurier, the refinement of these championship caliber teams at this point against weaker opponents is really what you want to be seeing. And we know that they can just hand the ball off to Dolby 25, 30 times, have him rush for 300 plus, 3-4 touchdowns, have a game. That might not be the most productive thing for Western to do in this one, given the fact that as we were looking at it in the midseason check-in, that as of right now, you could very much make a case that there is four OUA first team OUA All Stars at receiver, none of which are Western Mustangs. And though you very much have brought up that point that we became privy to and talking to people around Western, that some of Evans' perceived struggles earlier on in the year were a bit of a product of some mistakes by the receiving crew. We know that when you have Seth Robertson and Braden Masseri, you have the talent there alone to have first team OUA All Stars. And obviously, there's been some stellar years that we've seen so far, EJ, Avery, the boys at U of T. With this Western passing attack, does it feel more like they've just been, kind of literally and metaphorically keeping it on ice given Evans' injury status and just the fact that they haven't needed to? And either way, what are you looking to see from this passing attack? We really haven't seen the creativity, I feel, offensively that we saw last year from Coach Gaten Richard, which not like a shot in any way, but just out of, I don't think we've seen some of those fun looks that I remember so vividly being at games and then reflecting on podcasts last year of, they play action look one way with a jet motion the other, and then he's rolling out one way, but then the receiver's going the other. It has your eyes going left, right, and up and down and upwards and backwards and downwards and sidewards. And it was a very fun Western offense last year. It's obviously fun seeing Dolby and Kelly break into the open field, but it's been very much, very, very ground and pound this year. And I think everyone knows, and certainly in that locker room, it's going to have to take on a slightly different color to it for them to get where they want to go this year. Where do you think this game can help them in terms of getting there?
Well, I think if you look at this defense for McMaster, and you and I have been bullish on them going into this year, when you look at their strengths, I'd say if there is a strength on that defense, I'd say it's probably the front seven. And I like the way that this D line has been going. We already saw the work that Dominic Lamani and that Greg Palmer, what they did against, albeit a very banged up Guelph offensive line, and we know how good those linebackers are. And I like the look at those guys. I think that where Mac has really struggled, especially in the passing game, is when the defensive secondary gets picked on. You remember how many X screens did Queens end up running during that game, and the long bombs that got thrown there. And the only reason, well, Guelph going into this, we had question marks about the quality of the receivers and what they were doing there, and then obviously getting to booed like 7 times for sacks is going to make it a hard time from that standpoint. But I think when you look at this just from the ground level and you say, where do we have an advantage? I would say it's probably within that passing game. And exactly like you said, I think the only reason that they really haven't committed to this passing game is because they haven't really had to. I mean, in 4 games, they scored 45 against Queens, 53 against Guelph, 55 against Ottawa, and 63 against Carleton, damn near all of it being on the ground. So, not like if it ain't broke, don't fix it type deal. And I certainly don't imagine that they're just going to say, oh, we need to abandon the run game going up against McMaster. But I think that going into this makes it to be a great time in order to really kick that pass game in gear again. You're going up against a MAC squad this week, and then looking ahead, going up against Windsor that has a stout defense as well, a York team that's, we don't really know what to think about, but it definitely has some issues on the defensive side, and then you play against Laurier in the back half of the season. And if this Western season goes how most people expect it to, when you have at least 2 or 3 more weeks into the postseason as well, having your offense and specifically your passing games start getting ready now is only going to help you going into the back part of that season. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more of an effort from to get Evan Hillock and the rest of this passing game really going in this one. But yeah, I think they still have some time, even if it doesn't go to full fruition here.
And though I've yet to see any feedback from our midseason check-in podcast, specifically relating to, us giving our top 10 rankings, and perhaps to the dismay of many folks in London, my putting Western at 5th below both Sask, Laval, and Montreal, Laurier being number 1, same with the USports top 10. I just have these flashbacks of that Yates Cup last year where Laurier able to get up early, Western gives them their counter punch and trying to stay on the ground. Western, I think, scored first even on just a major Keon Edwards run down the sideline. But I just have this flashback of, if you're playing a team that can A, slow you down a little bit in the run game, and B, possibly put up points and put up points quickly. Yeah, we got to see how that next punch looks like. We know they have the guys for it. It's just, again, it's the question of, have we not been seeing it out of, as you were saying, just the lack of necessity for it, or something else altogether? The Adam Grandy return, obviously interesting to think about in terms of his familiarity with the program and everything like that. But of course, on a homecoming, off a bye, and frankly, in most scenarios, regardless of the extraneous circumstances, it's Western at home in this one over Mac. Tom, I don't know if you have any final thoughts you want to add onto this one.
Yeah, it's Western at home. That's I think everybody can kind of see that one. What I'm really hoping for here, I want to see things get fine-tuned on both sides. Like we were talking about here, I want to see Western's offensive passing attack really start to take root and take hold and just look a little bit better than what it has been. I mean, we've seen Seth Robertson and Braden Masseri and Evan Hillock, and we've seen what they're able to do. I haven't really seen Dasani McIntosh go off that much. I haven't really seen Roman Campanero become a real big factor into this passing offense either. And I'd like to see those guys really start to get involved. Or if nothing else, I want to see Seth Robertson continue to dominate like he normally does in the air. For Mac, once again, on the offensive side, I don't want Guelph to be the one blip here where you saw something from that offense. We need to see some more from that team. And even if it's if it's difficult, even if there's a lot of other 2-and-outs because Western is just that good, whatever, I need to see some kind of consistency here to know that we're building towards something.
For what it's worth, Tom, I also don't want to see that Guelph game being the only blip on the radar. They were able to get their offense going. Tom, by the way, we have pieced together some sense of what's happening with my bike ride. Do you want to talk about that at all, or is there too much still bacon in the oven for us to preview what's happening with any of the connections that we're doing with that? Should we just save that for another? Okay.
We'll save it for another. We've got some things that are cooking up here, but I need to shore up some details.
No problem. But what we have in store, what seems to be percolating, is very exciting. So yes, if you're wondering when the ride will come, it's because of these conversations that Tom is doing the Lord's work and putting together. But I think we have something really special coming for that. Let's move out to Kingston, where the Queens Golden Gales are playing host to the York Lions. Queens coming off that big win on the road against Waterloo. York coming off that exciting but disappointing loss nonetheless for them at home against Carleton. Tom, let's start with the update on Keegan Hall. We came out of week five, unsure of what had happened. I had completely even missed. He took a bit of a hit to the head that you would correct me on. Then on the midseason check-in pod, you had mentioned it was a stinger. What do we know about that for folks who aren't familiar? What does that kind of allude to? What sense do we have about Keegan's status going into this game?
I'm fully expecting Keegan Hall to start and play into this game. I think that the stinger is by absolutely any time you have contact to the head, you take that as serious as anything, and you make sure you go through your processes and you make sure you go through your everything. From the word that I've heard from around the league and from around this team in particular here, I think that he's fine. And I think that he should be the starter going into this Queens game. So that's great to hear that it's just a minor injury and that it should just be completely fine, ready to go. The one piece that I did hear about another very key player in this one, I had a phone call a little while ago and confirmed in the OUA and in USports, if you are thrown out of a game, regardless of when that is, you are also thrown out for the next game. So Justin Pace will not be playing in this game.
Very interesting. Though ultimately, I think of little concern for the Queens Golden Gales, even with Keegan in there. Because honestly, I don't even think we talked about the fact that in that Carleton game, I don't remember seeing Avante play in that one. And we know that he was dealing with a calf injury coming out of their first game against Mac. And calves are obviously one of those things that it's good that we got to see him come back. That thing's not going to be healthy till the end of the season. It's just going to be nagging. It's the nature of football. It's the frustration of high school coaches like myself and folks all over the place. You deal with a kid being like, "Yeah, you're hurt. That's part of the game here." But of course, when it spills into injury, that's when things get that much worse. On top of the fact that at the end of the day, as much as I still expect Queens to be able to shut down York, not entirely, I'll say, because again, all the love for Keegan, what he's able to do in this offense should only get better and better. Whatever we think of Carleton's defense, and it's not all that much right now. Look, they still move the ball. They were able to go into their second string quarterback, still move the ball. But ultimately, this York defense, and I'll start by saying the injuries, the whatever was going on with Raekwon and Peyton Ryder, they're not going to be able to slow down Queens remotely. I don't know what, like, you've had your doubts about of Rican, or maybe not doubts are the word, but I think just the expectation you have for him, which is where it should be, is quite high given how good this team is and wanting to really see it. And we might add the asterisk to it if Rican does come out and look pretty freaking good. We might have that asterisk that, well, he did it against York, but nonetheless, whether they hand it off or whether they're hitting that just slew of targets that Vreekin, whether he's always on point with them, is pretty darn comfortable getting it out. As we talk about, sometimes the team that doesn't have that go-to star guy is actually the most deadly team because you can't lock into who the quarterback is trying to get to. Like this Queens offense, it's not, I'm saying this as if it's news. It's not news. Is really darn good. And York defensively is in a bad spot. And again, whatever Brody Clark's status is, it really does validate the fact that he probably had such a strong case for President's Trophy if he was in. Because I know it's a counterfactual to say, well, their defense would have been so much better with him in, because we don't know how good this team would have been with him in there. But we saw them last year. And we could see those pieces coming together. And Clark was clearly the thing that held this whole defense together. We've always referenced that piece on, the mad scientist Coach Knox having those Sam linebackers win President's Trophy award winners. It's clearly not privilege, but he clearly puts those players in position to have a lot of success. We clearly could see that this offense is able to still produce when the key guy goes out defensively. And this isn't me being like harping on Knox's system, but Brody's role on that defense in this crazy way is arguably even more important of what Keegan does for them offensively.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, this is a Carleton squad that I think it's fair to say has struggled over the past few games. And against York, go for over 600 yards of total offense, including a quarterback that throws for almost 500. And Carleton certainly found their groove, and they certainly played their best game that last week here, but we saw the struggles that their quarterbacks had in particular here. And to see a quarterback go for almost 500 yards against this defense makes me very nervous for what York is going to experience at going into Kingston into this game here. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that Brody Clark brought a lot more than just being a solid Sam linebacker into this defense. I think he brings a lot more versatility in here, if for no other reason. If you're able to send him off the blitz, he would get to the edge and get to the quarterback pretty quickly. So at bare minimum, the quarterback is limiting who he can throw to from that standpoint, if not just purely going down for a sack. So I'm very nervous about what this York defense means, and I think you and I have already mentioned this a few times, but York is only going to win football games going into this season if Keegan Hall, not even just that offense, if Keegan Hall specifically is throwing touchdown passes consistently here and they're outscoring teams. So I think that's a pretty bad recipe going into a Queens Golden Gale team that offensively has been humming along pretty well. I've had my reservations about Alex Vreekin, but I expect this to be one of his best games this season, and I expect Jared Kasari to keep doing his thing on the ground as well.
And even if you want to say that, Vreekin's been good, not great, and even if you want to say that without pace and with one of the best quarterbacks in USports with an assortment of weapons around him that maybe York can do some stuff offensively. Arguably the biggest mismatch in all this are on the special teams units, where Queens is as good as assignment sound with some major playmakers that can, both in terms of, Matt Driver punting the heck out of the ball, Tyler Mullen, a great leg kicking it, Ian St. Arnaud returning balls left, right, and center, and a York team that honestly, beyond the frustration with their defense last week, and you were, I think, really bringing us to light when we were doing the week 5 review, was just some of these mistakes on specials that are just. I mean, they had a lot of busts on defense too, where you're like, guys, it's one thing to get beat. It's by when the other team beats you. It's another when you're just sort of putting it on a silver platter for them. So like that alone, I don't know how much you want to comment on that per se, is just as much as any. I mean, again, we don't need to overanalyze this. Like Queens is better in every phase of the game, and again, perhaps on specials being the most lopsided.
Yeah, I think that once again, our guy and Coach Taggart has really done a hell of a job with this Queens Golden Gale special teams. I mean, being the special teams coordinator and seeing what Ian St. Arnaud was doing last year, and just seeing that when you watch this team, especially when you're watching film of this, if you have a chance to actually be able to see like a kickoff or a punt and you see the lines of where guys are going, generally speaking, there is no gap. There is no, oh, there's a hole here. There's a guy that's missing here. It's not necessarily one guy who's always going downhill and always making the tackle at the key moments, but all of the gaps are covered as these guys are going downfield. And when you have a special team that doesn't allow breaks, that doesn't allow gaps, that is sound as all hell, even just being sound with no big plays is in itself a big play. So many times you see so many key games where a punt goes off of a punter's foot or something gets blocked or a big return happens and that can flip momentum. If you're consistently getting put deep in your own end, however many times Queens does have to punt based on the defense that we just talked about, but if you're continually dealing with first and 10 from your own 10 or your own 15, that means you got to drive the entire length of the field to get things going. And on a defense like Queens, you need every advantage that you can get. And especially with the fact that York's special teams have not been performing very well at all recently, I think that, like you mentioned, is probably the biggest discrepancy between both of these teams here and where Queens would and should really dominate.
I don't think we need to say too much more about this one. It's Queens. It's yeah, pace or no pace. It's Queens at home. Tom, shall we move on to our next one?
Yep, it's Queens at home. Let's do it.
Well, let's move on to a game that is perhaps the most interesting of the OUA schedule, but as you said when we went through it, for all the wrong reasons, perhaps. It's the Carleton Ravens returning home after their big win in York, hosting the Guelph Griffins after their disappointing loss in the at the 55 Bowl. Tom, what do you think is more of it reflects more of the reality of the situation so far? That Carleton with Tristan Lefebvre having a bit of mojo going now is actually a potent offense, because we saw him be a potent offense last year with Elijah, obviously. They lose Kasim. We get that. They have these nice running backs. Keyshawn Reed's had a really strong year for them. Ethan Roca. That they're actually a really strong team offensively versus looking at Guelph defensively and saying, well, this isn't, I guess this isn't really the either or I thought it was when I was first thinking of it. But in trying to see if what they did against York, which we just detailed, is a York team that's really banged up, was more a product of where York's at defensively versus Carleton, because we obviously have seen Carleton struggle mightily earlier on this year. Now getting a Guelph defense that has also struggled mightily. What do you think is going to come to light about Carleton offensively? Is a good chance that they're scoring points 2 weeks in a row against bad defenses? Or do you think they're finally starting to show a bit of, signs of life going into, the sort of peak aspect of the season where it's leading into the Panda game?
I think the one piece that's going to come up and be very clear at the end of this game is that Tristan Lefebvre is their quarterback. I expect him to have another monster game going into this one, and I expect him to do a lot of good things against the Guelph Griffin team that has been dealing with so many injuries. I actually can't believe it. With all of the pieces that have been missing in key scenarios here and doing themselves no favor in those penalty yards as well. That's a big piece of this going as well. But I don't think that we're going to see the offensive explosion that we saw last week against York. But I do think that you're going to see Tristan Lefebvre do a lot of really good things here. And I think that he's going to find his guys down the field. And I think they are going to move the ball and seem more like the team that we expected them to be at the beginning of the season in that good, not great kind of category here. I think I'm hoping, anyways, that they've found their groove and that they can continue on in this path here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. Again, the injury piece for Guelph is startling, and I guess turning it to that when you think of those O-line injuries that they have, which has to be the number one thing that we're looking at. Carleton defensively, the front end, obviously losing Ife Onyeka, losing Michael Lightbody. That D-line's been an area that going back to our exit meeting interview we did about the Carleton Ravens was very much an area where just like we went this year being defense is clearly the area we have the greatest concerns about for Carleton. That showed up to be the case week 1 against U of T. And it just happened to be paired up with the fact that they didn't know what they were doing offensively. And at the same time, Coach Griffith coming into the program, having to sort of set up his offense. As frustrating as it was knowing that they had so many established pieces in there, it does stand to reason that it would take a bit of time. I suppose we could grant the same grace to them defensively, but that really hasn't improved all that much. But thinking about the struggles that this team in Guelph has had offensively, even with a full, healthy O-line. And again, when I say struggles offensively, miss me with any, well, look at what they're producing in terms of yards in the game. Their rush yards are great. Their pass yards are great. But those are all supposed to be great in service of scoring points. And I think we looked at it. They're averaging 26 points per game, which isn't terrible in a vacuum, except when you're giving up 31 on defense. But it just doesn't track with what this team's producing offensively, which is why, again, I was so miffed in not having accurate red zone stats because we were looking at, a team in, say, Queens who's not too dissimilar in terms of the yards per game, but have darn near like almost 15 points more they're averaging per game. And then a team in Ottawa that has many fewer yards in totality on offense, but is also just scoring more points. So again, like when I'm here saying that like it's been a Guelph offense that has struggled, like miss me with the stats on the actual numbers, score some darn points. This is supposed to be a Boots breakout year coming off of such an ascendance last year. He's been banged up, not trying to not take that into consideration. But so we go from looking at a Carleton offense that's looking like it's finding its groove. Tristan's the guy against a banged up and a perhaps flawed Guelph defense. Now flipping it to say, okay, a banged up Guelph offense that even at its best, we had some very big concerns about against a Carleton defense that we had concerns about and have only been proven right on those concerns. What do you see happening in that matchup?
I think this is a very interesting matchup because it's more so now, who are they going to get back in time to play in this game? When I spoke with a couple of the Griffin players that were at the MAC game but were not dressing, it seemed like they were, a couple weeks away kind of thing from coming back into the lineup and being more starters. Do you just rush that along and be like, hey guys, if we don't win this game, we're at serious risk of not making the playoffs, period, let alone, not hosting a home game kind of thing. So I think that if there's anybody who's relatively close, you're in, especially when you see a Donovan Malloy who's got a club hand and is still running the ball and doing it somewhat effectively, even in that last game. I have to assume that you're going to see whoever can go in this one go. And I think that If the offense can continue to score points, if the offense can move the ball and score, or even if they just move the ball and flip the field, well, yes, you saw a Carlton Ravens squad go off last week against York. It's not exactly been consistent in this entire game or in this entire season. And if you can start them off in the worst scenario possible, I think you can give yourself more opportunity and more time to really get things going. Now, that is to say that we've watched this Guelph special teams as well, and haven't always seen the best things from them in that regard either. And missing field goals as well is going to be a big part of this. So to me, this game comes down to who is able to dress for Guelph. Because if they're missing, again, they're a huge list of key guys, especially on the offensive line front. This could be another rough game for the Griffins.
And when you said that part of just the nature of this being like a playoff game for Guelph, it's kind of a playoff game for both these teams. You know, let's go back to York for a second. We're giving them the loss against Queens. I'll take them to 2-3. They have Waterloo. Let's say they pick up that win. They go to Western, put them at 3-4 to then have their final game against Guelph. And right now, Guelph's sitting at 1-4. I said it already. I'll say it again, and I'll likely say it when I actually make my pick next week. I'm not taking Guelph on their homecoming against Queens right now. So that's at least a fifth loss right there. And their final game is against York. So you need to be at least, well, I guess if they win this, that's 2-5. And then, yeah, you need to be at least 2-5 going into that game against York to say, let's beat the York Lions, which again, I'm not even going to say is a guarantee at this point, to both be 3-5 and have the tiebreaker there. But that doesn't even preclude the possibility that Carleton still gets to a 3-5, and because they beat York, if we're now playing out a situation where Guelph's beating Carleton and then, York's beating Guelph at the end of it, there's so many ways that it's just not even guaranteed at this point. But it absolutely starts with this game right here. And though I want to say that, Aboud's banged up, that receiving core, hey, Arsenault has been hurt this year as well. One of the litany of guys, as you've talked about, that it just behooves one to actually realize the number of injuries they've had, but it is what it is. I'd love to just say, look, man, you should be able to run it down the teeth of this Carleton defense. But with how banged up they are on that O-line, and frankly, a Carleton team, with a guy like Chris Dupin, with a guy like Xavier Malone, who can really aid into slowing the run and certain support in there of saying, you're already banged up inside. We're going to maybe overcommit that much more to slow down a banged up Donovan Malloy and an Isaiah Smith who we still haven't seen get back to his prominence, and Caleb Sargent, who's been in and out, and when he's been in, just hasn't been as promising as we saw in spurts last year. Honestly, like, the matchup should be easy. Guelph, just run the dang ball. But I think if you're Carleton, trust that you have a guy in James Igamudo who's really good in the back end. I can't remember if Jake Henderson's back with them this year. We know that Schneider Caves had that awful injury and he's out. But honestly, like, I look at this matchup and I'm already wary about what Carleton could do against Guelph's defense right now if what we saw is closer. I don't want to say that what they did against York is what this Carleton team can do consistently. But I'm also just worried. I don't even know if we can just say that Guelph can run the ball on them if they just decide to really overcommit to it and force them to throw with a banged up Aboud and a receiving core that just has been, very, to quote the youth out there, very mid so far this year.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I have to say, I've really loved the play of Xavier Malone going into this year so far. He had a few phenomenal plays against York. He's been something of just a consistent dude for this defense, not doing anything really outstanding, but just being solid enough there. And if he's solid enough to limit the run game for Guelph, not even necessarily stop it, but if you limit them and you force a 2nd and 5, even where it's this is a clear passing down here, depending on who's dressing on that offensive line, depending on how Aboud is feeling, depending on a whole list of other things here. Like, I don't think it's, even if we went into this game with and Carleton played the way that we thought they would the entire season, and Guelph is 100% healthy, like I'd be picking Guelph to win this outright. But man, like there's so many other variables and so many other factors going into this game in terms of who's injured and what we're going to see. And the fact that they're traveling to Carleton for this game, I don't love that either. So yeah, there's a lot going into this game.
And we talked about the special teams disparity with Queens and York, and I don't have a read one way or the other on Carleton special teams in specific, but we're just seeing more and more examples of Guelph in those units just not performing where they need to be with what we thought this team could be this year, and even seemingly making a switch at place kicker last year. I forget, or last week it seemed like, which is just, I mean, you had to do it because I'm forgetting the young man's name who had started off the season for him, and I'm not trying to put him on blast or anything, but just wasn't cutting it. And then last week, it wasn't all that much prettier. Tom, this is a tough one because there's a part of me that's like, dude, he's like, Zach, you just have to pick Guelph because like you just have to trust in them to pick this win up because if they lose, they're not making the playoffs. Like it's just that. But I've just since last week, and again, there's partly the Ravens colored glasses of what they did against York and trying to pull back the reins on that a bit of saying that's a York team that is very flawed on the defensive side of the ball, and Guelph should be stronger than that. There's just a part of me that's still just like this Guelph team is very flawed this year. Dang, man, I'm gonna take Carleton at home in this one. There's injuries on the O line. I don't know if that run can get going. Abood being banged up. See what McCray can do in some of those wildcat options. I think Carleton should be able to move the ball on this team. I know that we've already said Carleton's that team that's kind of pulled the Charlie Brown us a few times, pulling the ball out when we've gone to kick it. Seems like they found some semblance of an identity offensively, and if nothing else, they can at least do positive things against weaker defenses. And so far, this Guelph defense has kind of shown themselves to be just that, a bit of a weaker defense. I hate to say it because I'm essentially picking Guelph to go from a team I thought had the potential to make a Vanier Cup this year to saying they're not going to make the playoffs, but that's where I'm going. It's the Ravens at home in this one.
Yeah, this is very much a head versus the heart type of pick here. I am also going with the Ravens. I think that if they can continue on, the insane aspect of this is how nuts the Carleton Ravens season has been so far with the really bad losses and everything else. They're sitting at 2-2. They very much still own their own destiny here going into this one. And if they've found a quarterback and if that offense has found its groove, they could make a real serious playoff run going into the back half. Now there's no easy game left. Like the easiest game is that Mac game at the end of the season. And if Mac continues to get better and better, like it may not be an easy game at bare minimum. I like this Ravens squad. I like I'm sorry. I like the potential of this Ravens squad, and you and I have always mentioned that. So while it snaps the griffin that's in my heart from coaching this team and being a part of this community here, I am going with the Ravens.
And at the end of the day, like one of those two losses is to Western. And like without parsing the numbers on it, none of us were going to pick them to go into London and pick up that win. They got punched in the mouth by a U of T team that no one expected to come out with such a blazing offense and such a just gunslinging attitude. And they clearly had a lot of things to fix on their offense, whether it was that Elijah just wasn't as good as we saw last year, whatever the case is, the trying to backfill from Kasim, Tristan Reddy becoming the guy, whatever those things might have been. And maybe it just is that we've seen them against a couple weaker defenses. Because again, even in the win against Waterloo did a pretty good job of shutting them down. But that was also a day where we saw Elijah still getting the bulk of the play, and it just, for whatever reason, he's just fallen off from where he was last year. Whatever accounts for that, it is just the case. So yes, as you said, despite it truly, I mean, it perfectly is the inverse of U of T, and just how that glimmer of that first game for U of T is just dulling and dulling more and more week after week. And for Carleton, it's a little bit of the opposite. I don't think they're quite the team that I thought them to be, but Guelph is nowhere near the team I thought them to be. And yeah, it's Carleton at home in this one. get him next year, Griffs. Let's go from the darn end of the 401 on the east end of things to the end of the 401 on the west side, under the shadow of the Golden Arches, a little town called Little Rock, Arkansas, under the guidance, the tutelage, the mentorship, the coaching prowess of one JP the Don Cercelli. A little place called Wind City, Ontario. The Windsor Lancers look to host the Waterloo Warriors. Waterloo coming off that difficult loss, both in the score sheet and the emotional loss in terms of the Nick Orr injury. I don't know if there's an update on that one. And Windsor coming off the very impressive win on the road against U of T, a game in which we talked a lot about Domofsky still not quite looking like the quarterback he needs to be for this team to really be successful, but showing us a bit of his character in some of the aggressiveness on some of these throws, even the ones he's missing, and his willingness to, hey, that end zone's 12 yards away. My first, second options aren't there, but there's some space over the middle by hook or by crook. I'm going to throw my body across that line. And though we don't always love that, as far as trying to understand who this young kid is as a quarterback, okay, all right. Don't want to see that all the time, but, whether you want to call it moxie, whether you want to call it grit, I like that. And of course, this defense has been very, very strong. Tom, what's your general read on this game coming into this matchup? These are two teams in Windsor and Waterloo who I feel have given each other tight games over the years, even when it was Waterloo as just obviously better in the Trey Ford years to Windsor, when at the peak with that running attack and those great defenses of a year and 2 years back. Always seem to be competitive. Maybe it's the W's they share in the names. I don't know what to chalk it up to. What's your general read on this matchup under the lights in Windsor, I should mention as well, which is always a beautiful thing to see?
Well, the first thing that I'll say is as long as I don't have another breakdown of some variety here, very strong chance I will be in the house for this Windsor night game. My current game plan is to go down to Western to watch a Western homecoming game against McMaster, and then just continue my way down to the end of the 401 and see the fine folks of the Windsor Lancers there. So as long as everything goes well and my truck doesn't break down on me, knock on wood, you should see me in the house for that one, which I am so excited to see all of the Lancer faithful going down into that one. Going into this game, my expectation here is that I want to see Nick Domofsky come off. I want to see him finally realize and finally get back into being that quarterback that we thought he was. I like this Waterloo defense a lot. I like Michael Omaseni a whole lot. I just recently actually confirmed that a guy that I coached last year for the Brebeuf Braves, and Josiah Aqua, has been playing on that defensive line for Waterloo and has a few tackles and has been a part of that rotation, which is awesome to hear. But the rest of those guys, Dominique Walker and Marcus Ola, I like this front seven a whole lot. And I like the fact that Keyshawn Bowen coming off the edge to add some additional pressure here, like Coach K-Mac defense has been doing. I think they're really going to limit what Windsor wants to do in this run game a whole lot. And I still think that the world of Wegby Mambo and of Andrew Delaney here, but I think that they're going to limit this and they're going to look at Domofsky and be like, we're going to dare you to throw on us. Now, the receivers that they have, I love. I'm curious to see when Talbot's timeline is going to be to come back into this game. But Tyreek Quason, Colby Ginn, Evan Martin, Mateo Trifon, these guys have been playing really well and they're great talents, but we haven't really seen that conversion in the passing game. Even in the last game against the U of T squad, Domofsky is 27 for 35, 257 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. So haven't really seen this guy come into his own and really be that dude that everybody's kind of been talking about. And I want to see it. Come on, Domofsky, let me see it.
And you got to add in Kareem Cotton into the mix as well. We brought his name up in terms of one of the players that was at the time likely not coming back for Windsor, only to be confirmed that he wasn't, in Javoni Cunningham, who was just as a returner, just alone, he was an OUA All-Star as a returner. He was one of the best in Canada. He might have been an All-Canadian. I can't recall. but also an explosive threat for them at receiver as well. And that's part of maybe that missing piece that we're seeing of who's stepping up as that guy. Because even Liam Talbot like doesn't quite do that. He's explosive in a more shifty east-west and then get himself downfield, whereas Javoni had that just almost like track speed where he just could just get down the field. And what made him such a deadly return is that once he saw that green grass, he just he could accelerate so tremendously. So seeing who's going to step up in that capacity for Domofsky is going to be very interesting to see. On the other side of things, it seems like it's the Emmett Ward show. Waterloo seemingly has played their hand. They obviously went to Caban when Nick Orr went down in the U of T game. And then after Orr came back, we saw a little bit of Ward the following week. And then when Orr went out last week, clearly they went to him in that aspect. That seems to be, we were talking about this thing with U of T of like, in you making your decisions, when do you go? And he might just be like, in their minds, for Coach Conway's money, it might just be that Ward is better than Caban at this stage in their career. But this also has that feel, again, bringing up U of T, of that piece on, well, shoot, we do have this guy. He's got a lot of potential upside as a first-year kid. Hey, let's throw him into the fire. Let's make sure to support him and know that, hey, look, no mistake is too big at this point in your career. Just get those reps, learn what it's like to play at the speed against OUA defenses, familiarize yourself with some of these guys that are, going to be here for a few more years to be able to grow with them. And like, let's see you show us something that we can sort of like sell the future of this team on, if you will, along with a kid in Vanderveen who, with Quentin Springer leaving, hey, one person's loss is another person's gain. And Vanderveen has certainly been getting the bulk of those missing carries there. So there's part of that aspect of, and I say all that in saying that at the end of the day against this Windsor defense, even on, I think, well, we certainly have no idea what Ward's best day looks like, nor Vanderveen's, but at this stage in their life, on their best day, this Windsor defense is frankly too much to ask for that young combination. Yeah, you got the veteran in Anthony Miller. You got some of these receivers like Logan Haru and Tyler Tierney, Ramel Samuel Slocum, Marcus Hogel. But overall, that core is young. And, frankly, I think it's just that perspective of, hey, look, it's going to be a fun time out there in Windsor, under the lights, all these type of things. Go out there, have fun, make mistakes, get messy, all that kind of stuff. Or do you think maybe we do see a bit of Cabana in this one where Waterloo maybe sees a pathway to this being a possible winnable game?
It's a difficult spot to be in because if you're the Waterloo Warriors, do you want a Nolan Caban who's to come in there who might be able to give you some solid mid game passing routes and then take off and run with it a fair bit? Or do you continue to try to develop a kid in Emmett Ward who really has a lot of upside potential and could really be that guy for you later on? To me, I think you go with the young kid in Emmett Ward. And I think if for no other reason you say, okay, you saw the back half of last week against a solid Queens defense. You're going to see another solid Windsor defense here. And if you can start cutting your teeth against these guys, and if you can really start getting your game experience now, even if they're, subpar finishes, if you can continue to build off of this and go into the latter part of your career here and understanding that I've already played against some of the top defenses, I've seen these things before, and I've come out of it on the other side and I know what to do now, I think that has massive upside potential, not just for now, but for later on. So I would expect Emmett Ward to be the starter here. I think he is the most talented quarterback now in that quarterback room. And I think that he's got to be your future if you're the Waterloo Warriors. So let's get him set up in this one. When you saw Nick Orr in there, you saw a lot of Evan Basiliga, and he might have been injured for the last game, which is why you haven't seen him. But once again, you see a healthy dose of guys getting into this. Riley Webster, Oganote, Anthony Miller, Haru. There's a lot of receivers in this Waterloo side that gets a lot of touches, and I think in my mind that's the showing of a young quarterback of I'm going to spread the ball out because I don't have a guy right now. I haven't thrown enough to these guys to really say, okay, that's the dude that I'm always going to trust with the ball, especially if a guy like Evan Basiliga is out for them. So To me, this is Emmett Ward. This is getting him in there, getting him as much experience as possible, and letting him do his thing.
Yeah, let him go tell his grandchildren one day. My first stars in the OUA was against Robert Springer and Istvan Asibodadze and Ethan John. Like it's a murderer's row of a defensive secondary he's going up against with a really strong defensive front. We're seeing Ahmad Taylor really come on the sort of mid part of the season, and it against a Windsor team where I was saying on the midseason check-in how at this point, and it's kind of validated by some of these games we've been talking about, that especially without Ottawa playing this week, it's like, you know what? If it doesn't involve Ottawa, Western, Laurier, Queens, I'm just, there's some interesting stuff. But at this point, I care about the big hitters. Windsor is oddly still in a space where I don't think they can really compete with those teams. Maybe they'd have an interesting game in Ottawa, and I believe they are playing each other at the end of the season. I'm trying to recall when that matchup. The second last game of the season in Ottawa. Again, two teams where we've seen some very electric games over the year, but a Windsor team that just with how strong we know this defense has been, a rushing attack that hopefully will get healthier with Liam Talbot the sometime near future, and I believe one of his twin brothers, not that he has a twin brother, but his two brothers who are twins. One of them I can't recall has been hurt as well. I think it's Brandon who is on the offensive side as well. So another weapon that you hope to get back to be able to, much like how you said that with Waterloo, whether it was Orr, whether it was Caban, whether it's now with Ward, having a whole host of guys that he can get the ball out to, obviously for Waterloo having Basiliga, that just reliable set of hands you can always get it to for completion to get that sort of momentum going is huge, and something that I don't think we know Windsor to have necessarily. But this is a team in Windsor that, because of that, just the home field advantage, one of the true home field advantages that they have, which on the flip side does make the road games a big challenge for them as well. They're a team that, as we've talked about all year, the end of that season for them is going to be hellish to say the least. But frankly, beyond that top four, they might be the next team in the mix. Yes, I get it. We saw Guelph beat them in their house, but they might be that next team, that sort of fifth team that I'm like, if we're going to sort of power rank teams just in the OUA, where I might just have them being like, yeah, okay, like, we might see them go to Ottawa in week 8 and then go back there 2 weeks later in a quarterfinal game. And I think if you're Ottawa, you don't love that proposition. You like hosting the playoff game, but I don't think you love that. This is a team that I think, as far as the non like home field playoff teams we have, so essentially out of the top 4, that to me is still the most interesting. And maybe in part is because like we had the week 1 bye, so we're still waiting to see them get to that 5th game. I don't know. There's something about them. Maybe it's just that magic of the Golden Arches and all these things that makes them just such a team that's a never die team. Partly, no doubt, the just philosophy that has been embedded by Coach Cercelli. But that institutional trust kind of similar with Ottawa and some of these other teams, that I just always am going to sort of give a bit of a leg up towards them.
Yeah, and I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that 3 out of their 4 home games are all at 7 o'clock at night and forcing teams to travel. I'm sure it's got nothing to do with that. But even if it is at a 1 o'clock game, having a drive for most teams, other than the Western Mustangs, be like 4, 5, 6 hours to get down there, that weighs on you. I don't care who you are. That you're uncomfortable. You've got a seat buddy right next to you, especially as the big man. It can be a lot. You can never really get all that comfortable.
Those windows fogging up just by you sitting there breathing. Just
yeah, it can be a slog. So having that as an advantage already, to go down there and having to go down into their house under those golden arches, and once again, like you mentioned, be that true home field advantage. Because there's one thing that I've heard, and I'm hoping to really see it in this one, considering this is the last home game at 7 o'clock at least. I want to see those Windsor faithful out in full force. I want to see Lancer Nation get out and get hyped up for your boys here. And that's really where that comes into play. And also in one of the coolest touchdown celebrations where the lights flash like that after you score. Yeah, this should be an electric atmosphere.
And honestly, beyond the Jimmies and Joes and the X's and O's, we were talking a bit before we started recording about Greg Marshall, just as two dudes just casually in a conversation. I'd say that Greg Marshall comes up in like 70% of our conversations, regardless if we're recording podcasts or just talking about anything. This game is such a incredible demonstration of the Greg Marshall coaching tree with the whole Cercelli family
Mhm.
to Bertoya to K-Mac, and I'm sure many other individuals who I'm missing in this one, or not off the top of my head at least. So there's just that aspect sort of floating over top of it all. I'm certainly taking Windsor at home in this one. And Tom, you inadvertently are with that last 7 p.m. start in Windsor. Were very much tempting me inadvertently towards maybe joining you, though I do think I need to have
Ah, come on, join me.
it's only going to be
Join
a
me.
2 a.m. return home in the morning. What's that going to be, especially when we're going to Guelph and Ottawa the next weekend? I'm not going to say yes or no on that right now, though. Still leaning towards the no, but I am going to pick Windsor to pick up the win.
Well, I would love to have you next to me as we watch all of these games, as I always do, and look forward to seeing your beautiful face on a Saturday. I am also going with the Windsor Lancers in this one. And like I mentioned that previously, I want to see Nick Domofsky really start to establish himself into this one. I want to see some more consistency at that offensive passing attack in particular. I have total confidence in those receivers. I need to see a little bit more out of Mr. Domofsky here, but I am taking the Windsor Lancers even despite that.
Let's call that a wrap on our OUA conversation and take these fine folks around the league looking at the USports schedule. And a USports schedule that has bailed us out on a couple less than stellar OUA weeks. And there's still a few games on here that I think have really caught our eye. And surprise, surprise, they're coming out of Can West, but not as exciting across the board as we've seen in weeks past. Starting on Friday night out of Alberta, the Golden Bears are hosting the UBC Thunderbirds. On Saturday, 2 p.m. kickoff from Acadia. The Acadia is hosting St. Mary's. Then at 1 p.m., sorry, 2 p.m. Atlantic time, whatever that time zone's called, not geography teacher. Then at 1 p.m. Eastern, Montreal hits the road to take on Concordia. Also at 1 p.m., Mount Allison travels to Bishops. McGill visit Sherbrooke after their big win against Montreal. Calgary hosts Saskatchewan. And then last but not least, Regina hosts Manitoba. Tom, those latter two games to me are really the only ones I'm terribly concerned about. I'm not, I think we're expecting Montreal to bounce back after the loss. And McGill, it'll be interesting to see how they continue. Obviously, we can talk about those. We can talk about the AUS, but I think we should start out in Can West on this week.
Yeah, to start first and foremost on that Friday night game, I think that'll be a good game as well, even if it's a battle of two teams that are near the bottom tier of the Can West. Honestly, wouldn't be surprised to see the Alberta Golden Bears pick up their first win of the season in this one. I think they've been close in a few games here and done some good things. But yeah, it's absolutely got to be the other two teams. I was going to say in particular, but I mean, Saskatchewan at Calgary. Calgary, while not showing it on the record, has played some great football and it has been tight in every single game. To me, this will be one of the biggest tests to see, like, how good are you actually? Are you actually this team that could play with anybody at any given day and that you can really do everything that's required except for winning at the very last second? Or were those games just doing enough to get into those conversations and going from there? I think the world of the Saskatchewan team, Anton Ammanrud once again playing some of his best football, although David Jordan still doing some good things for the Calgary Dinos as well. I'm just really interested to see what that looks like.
Yeah, well, and first, I actually wanted to ask you, just going back to the UBC Alberta game, just quickly, who do you think we're going to see for the Thunderbirds between Angle and Viato at this point? Seemingly, they've kind of split the reps so far and have both shown really strong things. I mean, again, I just Viato's arm is one of the most impressive arms I think we have in USports right now. But obviously, the production they've gotten from Angle when he's been in playing a half or a full game has been really solid from them. So not to backtrack, because I do want to pick up your commentary on the SAS Calgary game. But what's your read on that right now?
Well, it's tough to say because both of these guys, like you mentioned, have been playing so much. And even in the last game against Calgary, Drew Viato goes 10 for 19 for 108 yards. And then Derek Engel comes in for 6 for 7 for 35 yards. So I think I think Engel has been a great quarterback for them. He's been a perennial backup behind some of the best quarterbacks that UBC has kind of seen here pretty consistently, but has seen enough that he should know what to do, and he's got great mechanics going into this. To me, this is really reliant on Drew Viotto and how well he can start getting accustomed to the Canadian game, how fast that's going to happen here. Because once he really gets a solid grasp on the Canadian game again, I think you're going to start to see him really start to take off and start to separate as the clear starting quarterback for these Thunderbirds. But going into this game, I'm expecting to see Engel, to be honest with you. I think they're going to give him the start. I think they're going to continue on developing Viotto and developing things. And if for no other reason, they're going to start him and then potentially Viotto comes in afterwards if need be. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Angle going into this. And I think regardless, you're going to need to see a big game out of Tolu Ayadegbe.
Fair enough. Well, again, that was really my only main question I have going into that one. And your boy and Eli again continuing to see the really strong production he's been putting up. But let's bring it back to the SAS Calgary game. I think what's interesting in this one is it's a Calgary team that you said, David Jordan's shown some good things, but overall as a team, kind of labeled them as just weird, starting with your, observation you made going there in terms of the just like split between the first and the fourth year players. But a team that I don't have the numbers in front of me, nor would I trust them if I did. Turns the ball over a bit, some untimely penalties, and kind of feels like Guelph a little bit in some regards. And it's interesting to think that, we can look at that Regina game and just how special it was, but also remembering that there's a possibility where Sask obviously is now beating the Rams by that virtue alone, plus just for other reasons, we're both in favor of that Sask is the better team right now. But to Regina's credit, there's a version this weekend where we're coming out of it. And we can talk Regina and Manitoba in just two shakes. Where Regina, I would take it home against Manitoba, but I would think to be a tighter ball game than what Sask is going to have to deal with on the road, and perhaps even in quite large fashion in terms of the the point differential for Sask versus Calgary, and then people might look at say, well, man, oh man, so Sask already beat Regina, and it's a Regina team that had to beat Calgary in overtime, and a Calgary team that at home against Saskatchewan just got the brakes beat off of them. I think for what it's worth, as exciting as that game was, Calgary Regina still took like 16, 19 points in the fourth quarter, which you give all the credit in the world to Calgary for getting that done. But it's more of an outlier on of any circumstance, let alone on a Regina team who defensively we know is so strong. So I say all that as someone who does think that Saskatchewan's not only the best team in Can West, but is the third best team we have right now going in all of USports. But that I think there's a way that we come out of this weekend, and there might be some commentary of saying, wow, that divide's growing even further since SAS picked up the win. And I don't know if that truly reflects it. I still feel like, as we've been talking about, and it's what the kind of going commentary is, that those are the clear top two teams. And that, yes, there are teams underneath them, particularly Calgary and Manitoba, who could give them a scare perhaps. It's going to come down to those two teams. Sask kind of clearly being in position to host that Hardy Cup is pretty substantial now, but I don't think the outcome that I would kind of predict happening this weekend of Sask winning perhaps in a maybe 2-score margin, and Regina maybe in a tighter fashion against a Manitoba team that I have higher opinion of than Calgary, I don't think will necessarily make me feel that it's though I give Saskatchewan the edge, that it's anything much more than hey, it might be a who gets to host them with those just rabid fans behind them in terms of these two Saskatchewan based teams.
Yeah, I think that this Regina Manitoba game, I think, is going to be really exciting. It's probably going to be one of the most exciting of the week, as long as Manitoba can find their offense once again here. And you mentioned about Jackson Tuchinski, and you even had him in your top 10 for quarterbacks. Have yet to really see him come out and really do his thing this year at bare minimum. I mean, when you go down the the passing yards list for quarterbacks so far in the season. And I know that tells a very minuscule story in the entirety of the stats line, but Jackson Tuchinski is sitting at number 22 with 752 yards of passing, 5 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. His leading receiver, Udo, is also at the very far end, also at number 22 in the receiving mark as his leading receiver amongst the OUA or amongst U Sports here. So I think I think that Manitoba offense has not performed as well as they can. I think Braden Stubbs very well could be one of the best running backs that we have in U Sports, period. And but for whatever reason, maybe it's the loss of some of their great offensive linemen. I know one of them, like his name is escaping me right now, and shame on me for escaping not knowing an offensive lineman off the top of my head, but transferring down to Purdue in the offseason. That's a huge loss. He won the JP Metris last year as well. So maybe it's some losses on that offensive line. Maybe it's just this offense being a little bit more figured out by some of the other teams in the Can West. But I want to see some more from that Manitoba offense because I think the world of this Regina team, that Regina defense is playing lights out, and Marshall Erickson, Christian Katende in the run game here. Even Noah Pelche just being serviceable and saying, I'm going to throw up a ball to Nicholas Sirleaf here and let you go get it. I am taking Regina to win this game, like you mentioned here, because I just don't have enough confidence that Manitoba is going to find their groove offensively and get things going.
Yeah, I think that's the right pick. And again, to me, I just think Tuchinski, honestly, the biggest thing this year, those 4 interceptions, I really, I don't like.
Yeah.
Because frankly, he's never been a big yardage guy. It's, again, it's that ELR comp. I'm trying to think if there's another player we could kind of look at where, like, what makes them so spectacular is this mix of specifically much more for Tuchinski, at least historically, being remarkably efficient. You know, we're talking about a 70% completion percentage player typically. You know, a couple years back, the really strong touchdown to interception ratio, and then we started to see last year and this year that much more. A couple of those interceptions creep in a little bit. That's the part to me I think you got to get rid of, to state the least, especially with how good the run game is, which is, you know, buoyed by what he does as well. Don't shoot yourself in the foot when you do have to throw the ball out there, and just trust that you can just, you know, kind of grind the opposing team up. But I think with that Regina offense, with Peltier, with Sirleaf, with Erickson, I just think that even if they're trying to establish that run game, which I think Manitoba possibly does as well as anyone else in Can West. Obviously, you know, Riker Frank's probably, well, him or Erickson might be the best running backs, but I mean, Stubbs is right there. And I think as the totality of their run game, I might just give it up to Manitoba. It's that same thing we say about Western so often of how if you're playing a team that can put up points quicker than you can score them just rushing the ball, then you might get into trouble. Still taking Regina at home along with you, but again, it's just that piece on you know, cleaning up. If you're, you know, for the Manitoba fans out there, with Tuchinski, just clean up those interceptions and everything else. Frankly, the yardage is a bit lower than I'd want it to be honest, but it's not terribly far off from what we'd expect from him. It's the totality of what he does that makes him so special. Not that you need to hear that from me. You obviously know that. Let's take a look out in the other conferences real quick. I mean, Montreal is going to Concordia, and as we said, McGill is going to Sherbrooke. You know, I'm not terribly interested in the nature of the games as far as, you know, I'm not worried about Montreal getting back on the winning side of things. McGill, it'll be interesting to see this comp again with Manitoba, perhaps, of a team that's very much rests on a running attack, both with a strong runner who, you'll have to remind me the name of the young man that we saw come back for the Redbirds last week, but on top of the fact that you have a great true runner at your running back position, plus a quarterback that arguably is better with his feet than with his arm. That's frankly, more than anything out of these two games, what I want to see, whether that truly becomes a tenable option for McGill, and then inversely, whether that helps ELR become a stronger passer with the, you know, kind of building off of the run.
Yeah, I really need to see that same level of consistency from Montreal again going into this game. And Jerry Momo is the young man from McGill who has been playing so well, and I hear a lot of really great things about. I'm not super concerned about this Montreal team. I think that they will be able to find their groove once again here, but they did have a couple of key injuries at receiver. Hassan Doso not dressing for them, and I believe Louis Drolet also not dressing. Both of those guys who have deep threat capabilities and are great at what they do. If they can come back into that lineup, I think that adds a little bit more to this Montreal offense in particular. I don't think that this is a Montreal team with the same capabilities necessarily as that 2023 team, but let's not forget near the latter part of that regular season, Montreal also got upset by Concordia, and that kind of acted as a reset to everybody there. Despite the fact that we beat Laval, we just had a significant loss here. Let's get reset and let's understand that anybody in the RSEQ can beat you at any given time if you don't play on your absolute best. And I completely trust in Coach Marco DeLuca to get those guys back on track and where they need to be. On the McGill side of things, honestly, I think the recipe for success here is to do everything that you have been doing to play to your capabilities, especially if you are ELR, and just don't turn the ball over. If you can consistently hold on to that football and limit the turnovers that you have, you put yourself in a way better position to win some of these games. And that's exactly what happened in that Montreal game. You just didn't commit any turnovers and you got them to do a whole bunch yourself. So if you just keep doing that the rest of the season, you're going to see a lot of success going into this one. I do expect Jerry Momo to have another big game. However, the bottom tier, I don't want to say bottom tier, but the rest of the RSEQ is very strange in the fact that like Sherbrooke has beaten McGill, and McGill's beaten Montreal, and then Montreal's beaten Laval, and so it's a very strange look, especially earlier on in the season here. I expect that Sherbrooke is definitely going to come out and give McGill everything that they can handle, but I'm taking McGill to win this one.
And a Sherbrooke team that kept it close with Laval instance during their matchup 2-3 weeks ago, I suppose. Let's head out to the Maritimes. We got St. Mary's at Acadia. We got Mount Allison at Bishops. You know, these matchups are maybe a bit more interesting than I sort of led on to begin with, because on the one hand, like there's clear favorites in these games. I want to see Bishops bounce back, though coming off a win. Again, the 20 points on Acadia team that, still kind of getting our grasp of who they are as a team. I want to see them take it to Mount Allison, not out of, wanting Mount Allison to have to get, blown out by any measures. All the love in the world for Coach Brady, but as far as Justin Quirillon, the presumptive and the reigning MVP in this league, coming off of not a stellar game against the clear lesser tier team in Acadia, and also having that difficult game 3 weeks ago against St. Mary's. Come on, let's get it going right here. And then of course losing to St. FX all the while, right? So in terms of, again, trying to reestablish, you talking about sort of getting that back on track. I think this is a big week for Bishops. They're at home. And then for St. Mary's, you have they beat St. FX. My apologies. Without Silas. So to me, that game's a wash, but it still counts in the win column. St. Mary's coming off the tough loss against those St. FX team. And frankly, a team that, though we've seen more signs of life offensively, we know it's a team where it's the defense that makes them so special. Going against a team in Acadia that, as we just mentioned, I'd say limited Bishops in their outing last week. And if that's something of a consistency, something that we can see, actually, this Acadia team, whatever it chalks up in the win-loss column at the end of the year, there's something going on defensively there. They did it to Quirillon, and then the next week, they had a good outing against Shipley and St. Mary's. But for St. Mary's, beyond that defense, if you're going up against a team in Acadia that might be proving that they have a similar thing to you going on there, can your offense really have a strong outing, or is it really just that early season outing we saw from Shibley that is kind of like we've talked about some other teams sort of resting on the laurels of a maybe outlier performance earlier on in the year? what are sort of your notes and what are the things you're looking to learn from these two matchups we have out east?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of great things from this St. Mary's defense over the past year or so, and even going into this year as well. This is this is an Acadia offense that has very much struggled. They are dead last in the entirety of USports in yards per game here, and I don't imagine that that's going to get any better going up against the St. Mary's defense. To me, I really want to see what this offense can do here. Get a game going, even if this is turns out into be something of a blowout game potentially for St. Mary's. I want to see this offense really find its legs, because if that offense can match the talent that that defense has, St. Mary's would easily be my pick to get out of the Loney Bowl to get a Loney Bowl into this one. But I don't have enough confidence just yet in what that St. Mary's offense looks like. So I want to see them really go off in this one. For Bishops, exactly like you mentioned, Justin Keohane has to start playing like the AUS MVP he was just last year. I don't know that we've seen that really come to fruition the entirety of this year. I think we've seen splashes of it and just some quick flashes, I guess. This is a Mount Allison team that has also very much struggled going into this one. And while, like you mentioned, I wish nothing but the best for those Mounties, and Scott Brady is absolutely my guy, I expect this Bishops team to come away with a victory, and I want Justin Keohane to look good when he does it.
Yeah, it feels like, JQ's been sort of leading the pack out of, I don't want to say out of default, but it's like it's not out of him clearly just taking the reins of the AUS and being dominant. Both, I think, a reflection of the individual play, and then as well, Bishops as a whole clearly not being as dominant as they were last year, to state the least. But at the same time, those three at the top, take your pick of who you think is going to come out, and you can make a strong case for either one of them. Tom, I think we're going to call that a wrap. You can find Tom in London at 1 o'clock for a kickoff. His Marauders taking on the Western Mustangs, and at 7 p.m., when the Windsor Lancers host the Waterloo Warriors. I am likely not with them, but I'm not going to say never, because never's a long time. Tom, final thoughts going into this week 6, week 5 of OUA and USports football action?
I was going to say London community and Windsor community, bully Zach into coming with me here. Although he doesn't have social media, there's a lot of people in the London community that listen to us and know who you are. So hopefully they get a few texts over to you. Why wouldn't you want to come down for a Western homecoming, my man? But I'm once again very much looking forward to this week, as I always am. I'm interested to see the storylines as they watch up, but I think easily the most exciting games of this week should be out in the Can West, as they almost always are.
Again, let us know with what kind of content you want us to see from us in terms of our expanding USports content. And if it's a separate USports pod, a separate Can West pod, I should say, we'll make that happen. We are here to bring you the best USports coverage there is, week in, week out. Tom, I'm not going to promise that I'll be with you at these games this weekend, but I can't wait to be breaking down all of them with you right here later on this week at the 55.